you guys
like something to do with the company?
Have you guys? We love the company. The company. Have you? Have you guys heard of the game at all? There's these little.
Yes, I have.
There's these little bugs, right? They're called loot bugs, and they run around. They steal your shit, and when they steal your shit, they just go yippee, and it's like an audio clip from some little meme somewhere. It's super funny.
Yeah. Which came first, the clip or the meme?
Well, I don't know.
Let us know when we're live so that we can interact and don't say words like Tesla.
We can't talk about Teslas here. So it's a bad word. Elon Musk is gonna come on.
And then the thing closes and cuts the carrots off. And they've done a software update, so people have been putting their fingers in. I've been suggesting that those Cybertruck is that what you think the appendage should be?
Any of them. That sounds like a terrible idea. As somebody who has had their arm and hand stuck in a gantry machine before, I don't recommend putting digits or any other appendages in machines.
I've had a couple close calls like that.
Oh boy. Oh, bingo bongo. Alright, we're gonna be live in 3, 2, 1. And wait, where's my thing? Where'd we go? Hey, there we are. Hey, hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Unnamed Tavern. We are here to talk about scientism and what is it and does it make any sense? Before we start, I do want to shout out real quick that the petition for Canada, if you're Canadian, is now up and available for anybody who wants to sign the petition to make the video game space better so companies stop stealing your money and wrecking your games, and stop killing video games. If you're curious about that, feel free to ask me, or you can check out the pinned message. It is at the top of the chat, and it goes right to the petition itself. If you do need to know any other information, let me know. I'm Trash. This is Landon. This is the Unnamed Tavern guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Opie. I'm on the Twitter with just about everybody else that's like in this kind of circle. Been around for a bit, but I've been on and off on there. So I know like about Dapper Dino and the old Non Sequitur show back in the day. So I'm familiar with this group. So
they just trauma dump on everybody. Why don't you about NSS?
It's a tragedy.
I'm convinced it's cursed.
And what are we drinking, by the way?
Well, I finished my tea, so I don't have anything. So
I got myself an Alexander Keats. This is my last one. What do you got, Landon?
I've got some 8-year-old rum from Haiti, really from Haiti, and in my Antarctica South Pole, shot glass that was foraged.
It's a frosty glass too. That's great. It's on brand. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about
the tears of flat earthers? Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself so people have like a rough idea about kind of who you are, where you're coming from, and then we can jump into the topic?
Yeah, so I used to go to college over at Carthage, studying paleontology. I had to drop out due to family reasons, and then I started working with my dad as a machinist for like 13 years. But now I'm starting to go back to school, and I want to finish my degree in paleontology. But over time, I've also developed a real love for philosophy of science, and I've noticed that a lot of people don't know too much about it, and I want to advocate for it as much as possible. So,
well, I'm sure everybody here knows that I
have
have
an opinion.
Really bad I have a love-hate relationship with philosophy, so this is going to be fun. And I know Landon's pretty.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. There's the topic for today is scientism, and I think you had a sort of a set to walk us through. So do you wanna?
Yeah. So like I could separate between like 3 different things. One is like the pejorative. You tend to see people that are ignorant of science, like pseudoscientists, will charge everybody else with scientism by where science is a religion, it's a dogma, it's faith-based or something like that. We're just imposing our worldview onto them and stuff like that. You can see that in creationism and flat Earths. Ironically, also flat Earthers like also adhere to a weird cargo cult of science for themselves. But in the middle bracket for the second one would be the battle between philosophy and science. You start seeing that the scientists don't think that philosophy is really useful for it, but then the philosophers are like, "You're being scientistic." Um, there's things that philosophy can help you out with, especially in philosophy of science and epistemology. And then the third kind would be sociology, or the soft sciences versus the hard sciences, and the pecking order between that, like going from physics to chemistry to biology to sociology. So
Is math at the top of the hierarchy?
It's
I don't
math
know.
and science.
Um,
Uh-oh. I
I'm
asked I
I'm
asked a bad
agnostic.
question.
I'm agnostic
It,
on like number realism, but I think they're discoverable rather than invented. So, but that's different than
I think that,
numerals.
but,
Yeah.
but the one of the things Weiser hammer on me was to say the universe does not ask your permission to do what it does. So when you come up with this mathematical model, that is not a prescriptive thing of this is how the universe works.
Well, I think I
Yeah.
immediately drove
Question?
us off of topic. I'm a car just
Well,
isekaiing this entire.
you're fine.
I am Truck-kun. We're going to another dimension.
But is the universe mathematical?
Oh God. Is that a question for science or philosophy, Landon?
It's having a mathematical model. Is the universe describable by mathematics? What do you
I
think?
don't know.
What's it called? I think like everything we were describing with models themselves, because there's no we have to understand the difference between the map and the terrain, and all we're doing is making maps and models of how we perceive things rather than the actual object itself. So maybe there's not math on the ultimate, model of the world, but it could be.
I think that
As Manya just said, if we could try to quantify the universe by using math as a tool, I think is an approach. But just
I was just gonna say I think that from like a literal stance, I think you could do that, but I think as soon as you start doing that, you start losing context and you start losing information in a practical sense. So in doing so,
Oh
you
yes, definitely.
run into some problems.
A
but
oh, go ahead. You were about to say something.
I think you have a
Oh, okay.
notion of this as a pecking order of math being sort of like pure. Mathematics itself describes itself as being incomplete, inconsistent, or trivial. The extended Gödel's theorem. So if mathematics knows that it cannot describe all things, either it axiomatically can't come up with truth, but there's no machine, there's no stuff. Is it real to expect the universe to be purely mathematically describable if math is also limited?
Probably not, if that's the case.
We don't know. I guess it'd be the case.
Exactly.
Who's to say? What were
it's
we
beyond
there?
my wheelhouse.
Just pull a Ken Ham. Were we there?
Oh, that studying paleontology, I really don't like that question too much because, like.
So tell us about this sort of so-called historical science that you practice, right?
Well, in philosophy of paleontology, historical science is actually a term, and it's taken seriously, but like done like in good faith with that when you're comparing it to the experimental sciences, because like how you know about the past is very different than how you know the very tiny stuff. There's an asymmetry. We can use our instruments to constantly get more finer and finer measurements of tiny things, but going back in time is kind of difficult for us. A lot of things are underdetermined because of it.
And even notion of the notion of going back in time. And I know it's a popular meme to say in astronomy you're looking back in time. But if you're adhering to relativity, I think, and properly returning to relativity, you say that time is now, and what you observe is now. So when an astronomer says this galaxy is a billion light years away, what they really mean is at the time that light left that galaxy, at the speed of light, it took a billion years to reach us. But then people then say, well, if that's the case, what does the galaxy look like now? And relativity would say, look at it, because that's what it is now, right?
Yes,
no,
exactly.
No. What is it like now? It's like, no, our now, because relativity.
When will then be now? Soon.
There's no absolute frame of reference. There's no notion. You can't sit there and say, yeah, but what if I'm, well, you might ask somebody else's, but your frame of reference, the universe you see now is now. Even the Big Bang flash, the micro background, is what the universe looks like now for you, right? Not back then.
Yeah.
So that's an example of like a proper debate about science as opposed to historical. You never weren't there, so you can't see it.
To build on to that, I guess it doesn't really matter what stars are like now over there, because it's not useful to us. Like we're getting the information from our frame of reference to ourselves. So
the information
we should only be really caring about. Yeah, and we should only be using current information, not information that hasn't gotten here yet.
And if you want to switch to someone else's frame of reference, you know how to translate your reference into their reference, right? Even then, you're just doing a translation. It's not really real in that sense.
In the case of your three kind of, like, did you even get to all three yet? We only get to one.
I did.
So which one do you find that you run into the most in like different sections of your life? Because you've studied, you've worked in like as a millwright, like you've worked in machining, and you exist on Twitter. So do you find that like which one you run into changes based on where you are?
Yeah, roughly. I would say that I end up finding myself in the middle one a lot more, especially in machining, because yes, machining isn't a science per se, but it's really close to engineering, and a lot of engineers are very scientistic compared to like learning about more liberal arts style subjects. You can
Allow me to object to that, but please go on.
Okay. No.
Please go on.
And then also machinists themselves too. We're kind of stuck in like the heavily pragmatic. Like we only care about like what actually works and stuff like that. And for them, wrapping their head around like things that are useful in like philosophy. Well, there's a lot of different topics in philosophy that aren't really useful for day to day to them. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So when I say I'm going back to school, they're like, why?
Oh yeah, like you're successful enough where you are. What's the point? Why spend the money, et cetera, et cetera? Very, very pragmatic, practical in that sense.
Machining and machinists have really extraordinary practical skills and engineering and methodologies, and the notion of stuff. Even when you're in any kind of, let's say, experimental physics, you are interacting with machinists and glass blowers and other things because you're making instrumentation in a very careful way. And machinists have extraordinary skills at producing a lot of stuff. And a lot of science would not be possible without machinists actually knowing how to machine.
Yes.
It's the segregation, right? It's the segregation between theory and practical. And I think that is something that philosophy struggles with a lot, is where do you take the theory and how do you apply it? I listened to William Lane Craig recently, and he was putting forward his genocidal Canaanite thing. And when asked the question by Alex O'Connor about, like, yeah, but you understand how that comes off and what the implications are, and he says, I don't care to justify the implications or what it means. I only care about whether or not what I'm putting forward is logically sound, because that's not what the argument is about. And I'm like, why don't you care about that? That seems important.
Yeah. So if I could be so bold as to bring up the objection, I find, I give it very generalized statement. I find that a lot of engineers are not scientists, but believe they are, do not practice scientific method, but believe they do. They think that
Yep.
because what they do is technical, it makes them scientists. And in my career, I've run up against time and time against engineers who don't understand science, and they don't understand the fact that science values questions. Engineer gives you answers and methodologies that have been well practiced, right? It's a
Applied.
very technical, but technical doesn't mean it's scientific. And
No.
so where I will challenge a well engineered principle, the engineer will sometimes will say, "What makes you think you can challenge facts and established practices?" And says, "Well, because I'm a scientist." And the sad thing is, they don't teach engineers, I think, what science is, and that I think engineers run into problems again and again and again because they think they're scientists rather than really skilled engineers.
So you
I think
said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I think where engineers get their science from is the positivists from Ayer and Carnap. Like you start getting the verificationism kind of science where, like they're um how do you say like they tend to have those answers and not questions. They're using logic and they're using math to find truths about the world and impart those truths onto the world. So
Hmm.
And
I
then as a
start to see it
scientist,
that.
you challenge the fundamentals. They get like, "Who are
Yeah,
you?"
exactly.
Oh, I
Yep.
see, I see.
And say, I'm a scientist, right? And I say, I would come back and say, who are you? You're not a scientist. You are practicing engineering, which is important,
And some
but
people would
it's
go even a
not
step
science.
further and say, well, you're a software engineer. You're not a real engineer at all.
Yeah, and you come back to you challenge software engineering on math or on models or on things like that that are outside their wheelhouse. I wish because I don't believe a machinist would say, I'm a skilled machinist and therefore I am qualified to do brain surgery.
No.
But there are engineers that think they can, software engineers that think they can do the effectiveness of brain surgery in the scientific sense and and not understand what they don't understand. That's, I think, makes them sometimes dangerous.
Extremely so.
Hmm.
Also, like I get prints sometimes from engineers that are just like actually physically impossible for me to make. Like, yes, the math is there, the shape is there, but like to physically do it is just not going to actually happen within or within a timely manner too. And it's just
Yeah.
they're in their bubble where they have this constructed reality that they can make these objects, and those objects don't actually work in the real world. So
Yeah. And
Interesting.
it's a thing you run into it when you talk about, let's say, time, and you're dealing with engineer about time, and engineers are doing time-based stuff. They're using standards and sort of thing. And you point out just how wrong they can be about time and how squishy time can be. And they say, yeah, but that's only for Star Trek and extreme things. They say, well, but current going through a wire does not generate a magnetic field. The motion of current in a wire is not why you have a magnetic field. The engineer say, well, yes, it is. And I said, no, it isn't, right? And you get back to the process, and then you show it's actually due to relativity, why you get a induced magnetic field when moving current. And then they say, yeah, but you're splitting hairs. So I say, well, but that's what science does.
Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, because like maybe this is a little out of pocket. But if is it a problem because do you not in some cases need mechanical engineering precision and skills to develop a functional experiment for the
Yes.
theory to be tested? So
yeah.
is it possible that maybe sometimes this segregation or the segregation or people maybe stepping out of their bounds, like the same way we all get pissy when Richard Dawkins starts talking philosophy, right? It's like, get the fuck out of here, you don't know what you're fucking doing, because it's not that the integration isn't, the structure for the integration isn't there, or isn't as strong or as like tight knit as it maybe it should be, perhaps. I don't
I would say like people are free to like overstep their bounds,
Sure.
like philosophers, scientists, and engineers.
Mhm.
It's just like when you do, at least do it at places like the how I would probably say it.
Do it with a
Like,
little
and
bit of
also like,
respect and humble a little
oh
bit,
yeah,
maybe.
Or understand your
hmm
limitations, right? You're getting out
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
of
not
your
saying
area.
that people shouldn't speak on realms that they're not
yeah.
heftily studied in. I say, as an artist who hosts shows that are clearly way over my head. But in the same
No,
case, what I mean to say is that I'm not sitting here going, "No, you people who have studied philosophy and science don't know what you're talking about." I'm more just spitballing and positing ideas in a way to
Yeah.
establish the conversation. What I more mean is like
hmm
if somebody who is outside of their field saying, "No, you people in these fields don't know what you're talking about," and are like just way out, like when I say stepping out of bounds, I mean like stepping on people's toes, I guess.
yeah.
mm. Um, with that, I would say like they probably should put their money where their mouth is. At least if they're gonna critique it, then at least show something for it. Because like you notice this in like flat Earth trying to come up with their own model and then stepping on everybody's toes. That like it just doesn't work. The model does not work for all of what we
Yeah.
observe in the world at all. It just doesn't. But then they're
And
there
I
to
think,
step on everybody's toes.
in doing experimental physics, or experimental astronomy, you have to have a decent conversation with machinists that are going to attempt to try to build what you think need to be built, and they'll tell you what can be done and its limitations and so forth. You have it having a dialogue.
It's
Just like
practical.
if you're going into business, you better have a lawyer on your staff so your lawyer can keep you from doing stupid things. Similarly, the machinist will say reality is not that kind to you. You cannot.
Do you think
No,
that that like the hierarchy kind of affects that in what you were saying with one of your points? Like,
I would say so. You start seeing that uh, physicists are. I mean, yes, they're working on the foundationals of like down to the nitty gritty of like what is matter and stuff like that. But then when it doesn't really, it's not useful to use bosons and fermions to understand how T-Rex evolved like anagenically and stuff like
Uh,
that. So
mm-hmm.
just like you
Paleo
can
art.
describe with transistors and Boolean logic, computer science, but it's not useful to go down to the transistor and interrupt level to describe how a web browser produces content.
exactly.
Guys, I learned neurology and chemistry in the brain, and I'm gonna use it to cause the most amount of salt out of the enemy team in my League of Legends game, alright?
Yeah. I think so. There's a meme going out there, and they talk about you're just doing historical science.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk
Yes.
about how that term is used and what your reaction is to that pejorative attempt?
Yeah, because it tells me that they don't understand both philosophy, science, and science. Because like if you list off geology, astronomy, paleontology, and some of biology, they're all and archaeology. They're all historic sciences. So we always have to deal with traces, and those traces are really, really difficult to like rare to come by. And it's very cool toolkit that these historical scientists use to suss out what can we know about the past, judging from all these little fragments. A good example is like the what people do in philosophy of science is talk about the broken window, like a thought experiment, and figuring out like all you have are these little shards of glass that are in the kitchen, like on the kitchen floor. But then what happens if like mom sweeps up the shards of glass? Now you're like running out of evidence for the what happened. And like let's say the window pane is replaced. Now you find that one kernel, that one tiny little shard that fell underneath the fridge, and that's like your idea that there was a broken window. And it's kind of cool to come up with uh,
Yeah.
your understanding of the past that way. But you also don't know
It
how
is,
that
however,
How it got there.
yeah.
yeah, how it got there. or what caused
And
it? Was
this
it a
notion of saying
baseball?
criticizing, saying we weren't there when the window broke, so you're practicing historical science, and yet people that are doing that from a point of view of dogma, if you ask them, you weren't there when
Any
allegedly this
glass was
figure that may or may not
destroyed, or
exist.
when the fridge
Well,
was installed, or when the house was built.
He's
I'll go
Reductive.
even farther and
Hmm.
say if they're coming from a point of, let's say, religious dogma, and you say you weren't there to know whether or not Abraham ever existed, um, if you apply that logic back to them, then you get a different set of, again, you've asked me to ask the question.
Yeah,
If they're
exactly.
saying, Poppy, you weren't there, to see what happened when the dinosaurs did da 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 da. That's historical science. To say, well, you weren't there when so-called burning bush was talking to some dude, whether or not even the dude even
Hmm.
existed, whether even you weren't there at all, right?
You
And if you
mean,
ask that
Landon, are
question,
you suggesting that people just play the Uno reverse card?
It's helpful, but also it's interesting. They'll apply this to paleontology and all the other historical sciences, but then like when it comes to like criminal forensics, they trust that. But nobody was there when
yeah,
the murder happened. Nobody was there when
yes.
somebody stole the object.
Hmm.
But
Um, so do you
we
find when you're having these conversations, do you find the distinction that you're making between point A, point B, and point C, or one, two, and three, useful in how you approach whoever it is you're talking to?
Yeah. If I'm talking to philosophers, I'll usually stay in the middle one a lot of the times because um, so the middle one you can probably even separate even further out. On the extreme side, you have the people like the Churchlands, which is Patricia and Paul Churchland. They're philosophers of science. They'll reduce epistemology to neurological like brain states and mental states. Whereas like you'll have like Susan Hack and even I would say Daniel Dennett would be more on still applying useful tools of philosophy to the philosophy of mind. And
Mm,
then you have people in the middle like Quine, which Quine was all over the place in his naturalized epistemology. He wanted us to apply like the same rigor of science towards philosophy, and I'm all for that. But he was back and forth between being extreme and being soft with it. So
interesting. I wonder if do you think that was because, like, some things are really difficult in philosophy to even put into that sort of scope?
I think he was also like deliberately equivocating half the time. And the beauty of that is that now we're talking about Quine's paper
Yeah,
from different perspectives and interpreting it in our own way. Like you'll have Churchlands like saying, "Yeah, this is what Quine meant," and then other people are like, "No, this is actually what he meant was this," and stuff like that. So it's kind of beautiful that he constructed it in such a way that now we're still talking about it. So
well, I mean,
there's some
it's
value in
one
that.
of the things with time is that it can sometimes reframe things. And so
Hmm.
in that, and hi, welcome to philosophy. In the reframing of somebody's perspective and their lived experience, you can end up with an entirely different meaning to something that was done a very very long time ago, or even just 20 minutes ago. Look at tweets. Some tweets age like milk.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so this
Perspective.
this so-called pecking order of science, I guess that's your part of your third philosophy. Can you discuss
Hmm.
that thing, the implications, what happens, that kind of thing?
After this, I'm asking a question from Monty in the chat. Go ahead.
So I think I'm going to start with one important thing. I hold that it's important from E.O. Wilson, this idea of conciliant, so that all of our sciences try to apply to each other. And we see this a lot in very derived sciences, I would say, like paleontology, which we're taking geophysics, we're taking geology, we're taking biology, we're taking physics, we're taking chemistry, we're applying all of these different fields. And
It's all just
um,
history.
in, but you need it all to do paleontology, and it's
Yeah.
that kind of consilience is important to then extend it forward past biology to possibly the social sciences because we're still animals. We still have brains, and those with brains were evolved. So we can map our behavior from biology. We could also do it to sociology. It's very difficult. I'm not going to say that it's not, but
Yeah.
if we move away from psychoanalyzing stuff like Freud or Jung or Lacan and start going towards a little bit closer to cognitive biology, it would be a little bit, they'd probably get more reproducible results
Yeah, I think
than,
there's like a
you know,
degree of so there was one thing I discussed a long while ago with Bearded Heretic, whom you're familiar with. And we were
yeah.
talking, I think we were talking on the Answers and Reasons channel, and we kind of got into discussing how the field of psychology suffers from being shut down a lot because some of the experiments that were being done were kind of like torture. And
Oh
so
yeah.
a lot of it lost a lot of its momentum and its funding because of the literal torture they were doing. I mean, now it's just a YouTube channel. I'm looking at you, Mr. Beast, of leaving somebody in a room or two people in a room by themselves with no windows and no lights and no clocks and being like, "What's gonna happen?" That shit was
And
made
that's not
illegal in the
even,
'70s. Sorry, yeah.
you could apply that to like the Tuskegee incident. Like that wasn't actual science. Like
Right,
you're not going to
Yes.
get reproducible data from that. You're not going to get precise data. You're not going to get efficient data
right.
from it.
And because
It's
of that, I was saying that, but you could do things to get something like measurable by utilizing MRI
mhm,
machines. But MRI machines are expensive, and you'd have to have them
mhm.
dedicated to the experiments, and the experiments would have to be within the bounds of like human rights issues, right? So it's a very
Oh yes, of
complicated,
course.
expensive situation that we're just not invested in, right? Because the government doesn't think they can use it for mind control. Question from the
It's
chat, by
fair.
the way. Manya wants to know what's our guest thoughts about Deepak Chopra?
Oh, okay, yes. So I'm like definitely on the Daniel Dennett side that like there's things in philosophy or pseudo philosophy like Deepak Chopra that's like it's DPDs. They're DPDs. Um, it's
Pseudo
like studying
philosophy.
Schmet. Well, it's like studying Schmess. There's a lot of things in philosophy that are useless, actually
Mm-hmm.
useless. And people are really good at studying this theory of Schmess. And they're like, coming up with theories and openings of this game called Schmess. And we're never going to play it because you can't play this game,
Tell
Schmess. You can only
me,
play chess.
tell me if I'm wrong, right? And Landon, you correct me if I'm wrong. That there are some elitist parts of philosophy that just spend a whole lot of time.
Navel gazing, I would say, but yes, circle jerking too.
Uh, I I
Hmm.
will
Mhm.
wholly condemn Deepak Chopra as a fraud, and a
Ooh.
fraud
Yeah.
in his stuff that his perpetration of his fraud that actually does harm. The person is incompetent in his use of terms, or he knows better and he's fraudulent. You have to choose on his motivation there. But his notion that that there isn't that for example no you know skeptics haven't done anything in science. He doesn't. That shows his fundamental ignorance of science, right?
Mhm.
Scientists are supposed to be challenging and constantly testing stuff of that. But his notion about his misuse of scientific technology, I think, has actually contributed mightily to scientific illiteracism and people misunderstanding or even mistrusting science. I would wholly condemn his behavior and his philosophy, and that the world would be better if he just shut up and went and did something else.
That reminds me that
And I also made
he
my
miss
clean clear. And Chibrock, if you get this message, I mean it, right? Shut up and do something else, right?
Yeah, he's watching the
you just
stream
Your
right
behavior is
now.
disgusting.
He's in the live chat. Pussy, get in
um
here. Sorry, go ahead.
Mm.
you reminded me exactly of like one thing that he has done that's egregious, but also in philosophy of science is like this misuse of word of like paradigm shifts and current paradigms and worldviews and stuff like that. And like when scientists are doing this thing, we're puzzle solving. We're doing this on a pragmatic level. We love figuring these things out. We want answers, but we're constantly questioning all of them. and whenever we face anomalies, say for example the mercury perturbations
Mm-hmm.
that were discovered in the in the 19th and 20th century, um, it was an anomaly, and we needed a shift from Newtonian physics to special and general relativity physics. But that wasn't
Special,
a fiat of politics. It was us solving a puzzle, and it's not what Deepak Chopra or other people that are critiquing of science say is like, we're a cabal of people deeming what is truth. It's
Right. It's a
and it
it's an
appears that
active
his
discussion and a forum of
Mhm,
trying to stumble our way as a society and as a species as what truth actually functions as, or what it is in
mhm.
the abstract. I say as I have literally never read a single philosophical paper, and I refuse to. Don't listen to me.
his 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 discussion of about science and his sort of babbling is not useful because he's not really. He's very good at sort of taking a term and using synonyms like relativity or or uncertainty, and then using imprecise language and then turning it into a whole bunch
And then it
of
gets
stuff which is
picked up
not
by
that.
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, yeah, no, but
Mm.
And
he
then
really is. It really is unfortunate that he does what he does, because
did
what
you
he does, I
guys
think, is really damaging to the
did you
society.
guys hear about Jordan Peterson being congratulated and like talked up by Richard Dawkins on Alex O'Connor's channel for his fight against the Canadian government and their free speech rules?
Hmm. No, I did see that.
Oh no, thoughts, questions, concerns?
Uh, what you call it? I don't know. With like, I tend to stay out of that kind of stuff usually. I
That's
keep that
fair.
out of my Twitter too.
Nah, that's fair. That's fair. It's a little drama-y. It's a little silly.
Yeah.
That's
No, I'm plugged in. I just tend to observe from the outside.
fair. That is a very scientific way, I think, of approaching it. Good philosophy of science. Observe, notate, and move on.
Yeah.
I like
Um.
it.
So in the philosophy of science, somebody who's not a philosopher, um, can you help them understand why philosophy of science is a useful
Well,
endeavor? Right?
um, you mentioned that you studied under Feynman, and he has a wonderful quote uh, that everybody probably has seen. Is that he says that philosophers of science are as useful to scientists as ornithologists are to birds. And I happen to disagree with this quote from him. I would say that if the scientists are the Olympic athletes doing the thing, then the philosophers of science are the coaches and what is it? Trainers, they're the people helping you win the medal, but you're not winning the medal, if that's how I put it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So whenever a scientist finds the thing, usually we need a philosopher of science to help us like come up with the next recontextualization of like what's a good question about
What
it
do we do with
afterward or
it?
something like that. Yeah, what do we do with it?
But I guess to some extent, philosophy of science may be less useful in trying to judge whether or not a particular peer-reviewed journal is needs to be retracted or expanded upon or refuted. That sort of scientific debate.
Well, it
Um,
depends.
Well, that would be communication, wouldn't it?
Philosophy of science also deals with like what are good traits for a scientific theory and stuff like that. So like if a
but
paper
they
needs to
don't
get
make
retracted, it's
those good traits. They discuss value of traits.
yeah,
I think that's sort of
yes, yes, I would say
what
so.
Feynman
Yeah,
is trying to say. And so it's not
yeah,
that that's bad. Just like you say, ornithologists have value for a bird, particularly in studying habitats and potential problems that might affect birds. Um, But a bird building a nest doesn't need an ornithologist and might even be bothered by it.
Yeah.
I think it's part of his,
No,
would be part of what.
I understood what he meant by that quote. I just wanted to add on to it that a different way to take a look at science and philosophy and its interaction, because they're kind of continuous with each other. The same, I would say, my way of understanding how science is it's on a continuum with everyday inquiry. I mean, you see this from Thomas Huxley and Albert Einstein saying that it's just a rigorous form of what we do. When I'm trying to figure out how to make adjust on my machine, like I'm doing the same cognitive like methods that a scientist would do to try to suss out a problem or their model of the world. When I'm walking down the street, I'm still being bombarded by sensory inputs the same way a scientist is looking through a telescope into the stars. So.
Yeah. But
Now,
on the other hand, some of those sensory inputs are quite limited because, for example, you don't perceive that you're bombarded by neutrinos, and maybe a
No.
couple times in your life you'll actually be hit by a neutrino. But otherwise, on the other hand, the notion of, well, if you can't sense it, you can't see it, you can't taste it, it isn't real, is a problem because neutrinos are actually
metaphysics.
quite real. They're just
Does
less obvious.
this apply to like the idea that everything is subjective because you have to perceive it through your own body?
Not necessarily. Because you can still use other people's perceptions too, and then test those out too.
But don't you
Basically,
have
it's not
to
necessary.
interpret that through either your own hearing or reading of the matter?
Yeah. I guess then there's the added part is the pragmatist part. It's like there's certain things that are just useful for me and myself and I navigating this world, and then we can extrapolate and apply it further to like society afterwards. But if I was stranded on a desert island, like I wouldn't really care about what's happening elsewhere, just what's immediately in
You're
front
kind
of
of busy, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
But there are scientists and there are, for example, mathematicians that actually take pride in not doing things that are, quote, useful. When someone says, to someone, discover a neutrino, how is this useful?
Right.
The
and how do you
question
and
is
then how
probably
do you
ill-formed.
communicate it, which is a whole nother step.
Yeah. I guess there's
The question it begs the question: why does something have to be useful to have value?
It is useful in the terms of we use all of our knowledge to help better navigate this world with better precision, better efficiency, better flexibility to falsification, and better rational coherence. Like, and we're expanding outwards, like, but it's on a continuum of even more. Like, we can, find get error bars of like what to the 11th decimal now on certain like measurements of in physics. Whereas like that's not really useful to me who's dealing with only like 2 or 3 decimals. But if we need to get that precise, definitely, studying neutrinos or
So
other
before
particle physics is
you
necessary.
go on, we just got a super chat to real quick. It says, "Is this how you shiz? Did I do it correctly? I'm trying to do it correctly. Give me feedback if I did it wrong." No, you did it right. I said, don't forget to like and subscribe and share and shiz. They asked me what shiz was. I don't see that button. And I said it's the button with the money sign on it. So yes, you followed the instructions and did not get your dick caught in the toaster. Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Very funny.
You did not put your appendage into the Cybertruck. Did I say that? That's an engineering problem.
Oh
no! So you have to ask us off the air. But this notion of it's practical, right? I would say the mathematician party was famous for saying he took great pride in having done nothing in his life he said was practical. Right? And something like testing the physics of the terakelvin in accelerators to try to understand the first things that are the first second of the Big Bang process. How is that useful? doesn't that question beg the thing of saying unless I can use it in my everyday life, it's not of value?
I guess I want to move. I probably started off on the wrong foot with pragmatic. Pragmatic, like to me, is like that. Just what is more precise and what is like for us to use, rather than like the everyday like Joe Schmo utility
You're
part.
talking about like practicality in whatever
Yeah, that's
context.
Yeah.
So it might
But
not
like
be
pragmatic is just
it might not be practical for you going out and buying groceries, but it may or may not be practical in a different field. So it's contextually
yeah,
pragmatic.
I would say so, definitely.
I'm a helper. I do things. Probably.
Yeah.
Allegedly. We do have we are getting close to our time because this flew by as much as half of this went over my head. Yeah. Identifying okay, so I asked a couple questions earlier, so we're going to try and like burn through those really quick. There were two things. I had asked if you found that throughout your, because you've done a lot of things at this point. You've been doing machining, you've been doing studying, you've existed online dealing with the dumbest of the dumb. Do you find that in school, if there is any kind of like bias in or around philosophy in your fields that you've studied?
Oh yeah, definitely. In the like when you get stray closer and closer to the sciences, like a lot of them don't think philosophy is that useful in this sense, and they have this pecking order towards the other humanities because of it. You start to notice that.
So it's not. Oh, so it's
my,
not just a bias against philosophy, but it's also a bias against like a quote unquote soft science.
Yeah, you would say so. Yeah, even like, and it's weird because like paleontology is pretty soft in and of itself too, but
malleable.
They well what's prided by it is at least it's what's behind its softness is some pretty hard stuff, which is biology, geology, and physics. So
I think you'd be careful about this notion of, well, this is soft, so it's not as good, right? That's a similar error to say, well, if it isn't practical, if I can't use it in my everyday life, it's not value. To say if it isn't fundamental, it's just fluff, right? I think those are errors in a different form.
and
So don't.
you start to see that
If you're a sociologist and you start using words like relativity, you end up becoming
that doesn't make any sense. Like that's a word salad.
Yeah.
So you were about to tell a story about in your time at school, or?
Oh no, I was just anecdotes, like dispersonal anecdotes. I guess my mentor, he's definitely more of like he doesn't like philosophy and he thinks it's very useless basically. And I've tried to talk to him about like usefulness of philosophy of science, specifically in paleontology, but usually both those fields are kind of coming to the same, like at the same pace, just at different ways about it. Like, philosophy is thinking about these things a lot and watching the scientists do it, whereas the scientists are doing it, but you're starting to come up with, it's impressive like how forensics in paleontology can like come up with these answers with little that they're going by, and then philosophers of science are like observing that like the reasons and the logic and the like the leaps from each of those reasons and logic to get to those answers. It's kind of interesting.
From this conversation, it seems to me, through what Landon said and what you've said, that there seems to be some kind of like there's a segregation problem, and then there's a problem of like this idea of superiority, a lobster hierarchy, let's call it.
Yeah.
And it's not real, and it doesn't really apply, but the only reason it exists is because we made it the fuck up. And it doesn't actually hold any pragmatic or realistic value to us. All it does is cause us problems. And what we should be doing is integrating further rather than segregating further. How do you guys think that we build, like, how do we bridge this gap? Do we just teach people to stop being assholes? Do we start teaching philosophy in, like, at a younger grade? I mean, we start teaching science pretty early on. But we don't teach science until college.
I would say do both. So teach the
Yes.
scientists philosophy, but then also teach the philosophers science. And if you can bridge that gap, then it would be like naturalizing the philosophers, like get them on board with this train of thought, and
Yeah,
then also
philosophy
then
needs
teach
to be realistic, right? Yeah.
yeah, but then philosophizing the scientists to start thinking a little bit outside of their box. So
because I think, and this is back to sort of the general notion of having a liberal arts education, even if you're going, if you're specializing in so-called
Take an
hardcore
elective.
science, right? It's because those other things that are outside of your area that you're focusing on potentially have a tremendous value, and you won't know until much later on how many times, yeah, that's just a history class, who cares? Well, now history becomes quite important because of that.
What Landon is saying is do not ignore and take your elective seriously because you can apply them to your other passions.
It can enrich
extremely so.
On the other hand, if you're a philosopher, unless you've actually taken mathematical logic and you've taken, let's say, number theory, and you've taken physics, your ability to talk about philosophy of science is limited.
Sure.
I'm saying you can't. I'm saying you're limited, right, in your ability if you don't even know what it is. So people say, I just deal with the meta science, right? No, if you don't know what you're metaing, it's very difficult to do anything useful other than deproc battle.
Don't play the meta game if you don't know how to do the math.
Yeah.
I have a question from April, and then we'll probably get out of here. Or at least I'll ask one more question after April's that says, if PhD means philosophy doctorate or a doctorate of philosophy, does that imply that philosophy is relevant to all PhD fields?
I would say so. But you do, in the master's and PhD, tend to take some like rudimentary philosophy courses. Whether you get something from it, yes, but also whether you actually get something from it, though, that's a different story. Like you can see people. Yeah.
Ignore me. Keep talking. I'm just mumbling.
But I think as a value of an advanced degree is demonstrating that you can contribute to the field rather than simply studying it, right? And you understand how to advance the field and how to make progress to the point where the other bit I think is useful for advanced degree is in being able to teach. So the thing that Feynman was passionate about, when he wanted to understand something better, he got to the point of teaching it. And there was a unfortunate thing of a person. I won't say the institution, but this person was one of the youngest of this particular field to ever try to get a PhD, and they fundamentally failed because they showed a complete incompetency in the ability to teach. And if you can't teach the field well, your value as having an advanced degree is quite limited, in my opinion.
I would say, yeah. To add to that, I guess like knowing when to use jargon and when to actually like distill it down to something that's actually understandable from a layman's terms, and that's where you actually fundamentally know and understand what you're talking about, is when you can frame it in a different way that it clicks.
Yeah. As Feynman would say, don't use the language of the priesthood. Describe it correctly, not deep bubbly stuff.
I like to play the role.
I
like to play the role of Landon is burdened with knowledge, or a person A is burdened with knowledge. They explain something in a way that is way over everybody's head. Then they're able to bring it down, like Landon in particular is able to bring it down to a place where at least I can grasp it. Once I can grasp it, I start asking questions and saying, hey, is this analogy accurate? Does this make sense? And then he can say yes or no, and then I get to play hopscotch all my way down the line.
Don't talk down to the person. That's the other thing, right?
Don't bully me, please.
And don't belittle them. Take what they're saying seriously. Take it as a challenge to describe what you say and what the term is cringe-free. right? Describe relativity correctly without causing someone who understands the details to cringe when you use analogies. Say, well, it's like a pizza, except it's got sausage on it. Right?
Oh, no. Well, that's our time today. And I think that last little bit that we kind of went into leads into, I think, another conversation that we definitely want to set up with you and Landon. And I want to get Dapper on to discuss the philosophy of having these discussions of, like, people who use scientism or people who have this knowledge. How do you deal with, like, a flat earther? How do you deal with a young earth creationist in a way that is conducive for productivity?
Especially with scientist creationists. Yeah.
Yes.
Something, right?
Yeah, the scientist creationists. Yeah, absolutely.
Dapper would be a really great person to bring into that sort of thing as well.
Sorry, who? A scientist creationist?
Dapper, I think, would...
Dapper, yes.
Dapper would be a really good add this thing about how do you have a discussion with pseudoscience and other sorts of stuff.
Yes.
And be productive. Or be productive use of your time or your efforts.
One last thing before we go. Because we did have a couple questions we didn't get to, so we're definitely going to have it a part 2 at some point, if everyone is amicable to it. What's your favorite Kevin Bacon movie, and why is it Tremors?
Oh, I've seen Tremors. That's a really good movie.
See? Best Kevin Bacon movie.
But then adding on to that, it's like the Ghoulies, which is like, it's like a knockoff version of
the Goonies,
the Gremlins.
Oh, the Gremlins.
No,
oh,
Ghoulies.
Yeah.
But it's Ghoulies, yeah.
That's awesome. So we're gonna have a movie night. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you? Links are below. Go. What you got coming up?
Just my Twitter account. Yeah,
just his Twitter account. Are you showing up with? I know you've been having lots of conversations with Trolley Dave recently. Are you guys planning on hooking up?
Maybe we could probably.
Well, if you need a platform,
I've been on the Answers and Reason before when I talked about naturalism, but that was like 3 years ago, and I knew less about naturalism then. So
would you do a revamp? Like go back and revisit it?
I would probably definitely because I need to fix it.
And by the way, Chesh, probably the answer coming up is the soon to be released film of Kevin Bacon with Beverly Hills Cop.
You can't.
There's a Beverly Hills Cop, film that's coming out.
Let me know in the comments if you think the Beverly Hills Cop version of with Kevin Bacon is going to be better than Tremors. The answer is no. If you tell me anything else, I'm going to ban you from the channel. All right, we got to wrap up here. Landon, are you working on anything?
Oh yes, we have coming up the BE4, the 5th series, where of Before Earth, where we're going to talk about how solar systems form, stars that go bang and really things that go smash, and solar systems that get formed, ending with what we have evidence of how our solar system formed and how our Earth-Moon system formed, which is surprising given what we thought just 50 years ago.
Perfect. We're going to be live with Dumb Fact Friday with Manya tomorrow, on Friday, obviously. And then tomorrow I will also be live at 7 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch doing whatever the fuck I'm doing. I don't know. I'm watching some cursed nonsense while doing art. That's usually what happens. Sometimes
doing cursed art.
Cursed artwork. Yes. Yeah, it's very sad. I live a very sad existence. I'm here to suffer for your entertainment. So
you're here to boop puck. Your purpose is puck.
Boop. That's
boop.
True.
Hey.
Yeah, what's your job? Your job is to get butter. Oh my god. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Go check the links down in the description below, and we are out of here. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye.